I'm Rachel, 32 female. For the last 10 years, my life has been a series of blueprints and construction sites, a world I learned to love at my father's side. I'm an architect, and I've spent my entire career dreaming of the day I could design and build my own home from the ground up. That dream finally came true, but it quickly turned into a nightmare that revealed the man I called my father was capable of a betrayal so deep it threatened to shatter the very foundation of my world, both literally and figuratively. This is the story of how my father, a man respected by everyone in our town, tried to ruin me by sabotaging the home I poured my soul into, all because I refused to surrender my business to him. He thought he was smarter, that he could break my spirit and leave me with nothing but rubble. What he didn't count on was the quiet hum of a security camera and the unshakable resolve of a daughter he had profoundly underestimated. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. It all started with a plot of land. 2 acres of rolling hills just outside the city, dotted with old oak trees and a view of the distant skyline. It was the perfect canvas. For years, I'd saved every penny, worked every overtime hour, and taken on every freelance project I could find. My dream wasn't just about having a house. It was about creating a statement, a physical manifestation of my independence and success as an architect. This house was my portfolio, my future, and my sanctuary all rolled into one. My father, Arthur, had always been a complicated figure in my life. He was a general contractor, old school and respected, known for his firm handshakes and his no-nonsense approach to business. He'd built half the custom homes in our county. Growing up, I was his shadow on job sites, learning the smell of fresh-cut lumber and wet concrete. He taught me how to read blueprints before I could read novels. He was proud when I went to architecture school, telling everyone his daughter was going to be the best in the business. But his pride always came with a price: control. When I announced I'd bought the land and finalized my designs, he was ecstatic. "This is it, kiddo," he'd said, clapping me on the back so hard I stumbled. "Our project, Arthur and Daughter Construction, has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" I smiled weakly. "Well, Dad, I was planning on hiring a firm to manage the build. I want to keep things professional." His face fell instantly. The warmth evaporated, replaced by a cool, hard stare I knew all too well. "Don't be ridiculous, Rachel. Who better to build your house than your own father? I'll give you the family rate. We'll do it together." The family rate was his classic manipulation tactic. It sounded like a favor, but it was a leash. Working with my father meant he wasn't just the contractor, he was the commander. Every decision would be a battle, every design choice a negotiation. He still saw me as the little girl in pigtails, not as a licensed architect with a clear vision. This house needed to be mine, not his. "I appreciate the offer, Dad, I really do," I said carefully. "But this is my first personal project. I need to be the client and the architect, not the daughter. It's important for me to maintain a clear professional boundary." He scoffed. "Professional boundary? I'm your father. That's the only boundary that matters." The conversation escalated from there. He couldn't understand why I wouldn't just hand him the reins. He saw it as a personal rejection, a slap in the face. What he was really asking for wasn't just to build my house. He wanted a partnership. He was nearing retirement age, and his business, while reputable, was stagnating. He saw my fresh designs and modern approach as his ticket to a new era, a way to rebrand his legacy through me. He'd proposed it formally a few weeks later, sitting at my kitchen table with a folder full of documents rebranding his company to include my name. He wanted a 50-50 split of my new architectural firm, the one I was planning to launch with my house as the flagship project. "Absolutely not," I had told him, my voice shaking slightly. "My firm is mine. This is my career, my future. I'm not just an extension of your business." The rage in his eyes that day was something I'd never forget. It was cold and calculating. "You'll regret this, Rachel," he'd hissed. You're turning your back on family. You'll find out you can't build anything without me." Despite the threats, I moved forward. I hired a reputable construction firm and made it clear that while my father was welcome to visit the site as a guest, he was not involved in the project. The first few months of construction were a dream. The foundation was poured, the framing went up, and the shell of my beautiful moat. Our Wren home began to take shape against the green hills. It was everything I had ever sketched, dreamed, and planned. My father kept his distance, offering only terse, one-word answers whenever I called to check in. I mistook his silence for reluctant acceptance. I thought he was just licking his wounds and would eventually come around. I was so wrong. He wasn't accepting anything, he was waiting. The build was on schedule and on budget. I spent every spare moment on site, working with the crew, overseeing every detail. My best friend, Maria, would bring coffee and we'd walk through the skeleton of the rooms, imagining where her graphic art would hang. My new friend, Leo, a civil engineer I'd met through the project, would stop by to review the structural plans and often stay to share a takeout dinner on the subfloor. For the first time, everything felt right. I was building a life, not just a house. The trouble started subtly. A delivery of windows arrived with the wrong specifications. The supplier swore my father had called to correct the order. I spent a week sorting it out, costing me time and money. Then, a plumbing subcontractor backed out at the last minute, claiming my father had warned him that my project was financially unstable. I confronted my father, but he just shrugged, a smug little smile playing on his lips. "Just looking out for you, kiddo. Don't want you getting in over your head." He was a ghost on the periphery of my project, sowing seeds of doubt and creating chaos wherever he could. The construction manager was growing frustrated. "Rachel, your father is a respected man in this town," he told me. "When he speaks, people listen. He's making my job very difficult." I assured him I would handle it, but I knew I was out of my depth. Arthur wasn't just an angry father. He was a powerful figure in the local construction community, and he was using his influence to poison my dream. But even then, I couldn't have imagined the depths of his resentment. I thought he was just trying to sabotage the process, to prove I couldn't do it without him. I never, ever believed he would try to destroy the home itself. That was a line I didn't think even he was capable of crossing. The foundation, the most critical part of any structure, was something sacred. It represented stability, permanence, and strength. The idea that he would compromise that was unthinkable. But as the final touches were being put on my home, the unthinkable began to reveal itself in a series of terrifying hairline cracks. The house was almost finished. The drywall was up, the floors were in, and the painters were applying the final coat of my favorite shade of charcoal gray to the exterior. I walked through the airy, open-plan living space, running my hand along the cool quartz of the kitchen island. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was more beautiful than I had ever imagined. The stress of the build, the constant, low-grade interference from my father, seemed to melt away in those moments. I had done it. I had built my home despite him. The first crack was almost invisible. It was a faint, thread-like line near the base of the living room wall, spidering out from the corner where the concrete slab met the drywall. I noticed it during a final inspection with the site foreman. I pointed it out, my brow furrowed. "Is that just a settlement crack?" I asked, trying to keep the anxiety out of my voice. The foreman, a kind man named Gary, crouched down to examine it. "Looks like it," he said, nodding. "New builds always have a few. The foundation settles, things shift a tiny bit. We'll patch it before the final walkthrough. Nothing to worry about." I wanted to believe him. As an architect, I knew that minor settlement cracks were normal. But something about this one felt different. It was the location, right above a key load-bearing point in the foundation. I made a note of it on my clipboard and tried to push the unease aside. A week later, I found another one. This time, it was in the master bedroom. It was longer, more pronounced, and it traveled diagonally up the wall. My heart started to beat a little faster. 2 cracks could be a coincidence, but it felt like a pattern. The next day, there was a third in the hallway, and this one was wider. I could fit my fingernail inside it. This was not normal settlement. This was a symptom of a much larger, much more serious problem. Panic began to set in. I called Leo, the civil engineer. He had consulted on the initial plans, and his expertise was in structural integrity. "Leo, it's Rachel. Can you come out to the house? I think there's a problem." He was there within an hour. I showed him the cracks, my hands trembling slightly as I traced their paths along my perfect, newly painted walls. He didn't say anything at first, his expression serious as he moved from room to room. He ran his hand over the cracks, tap, D on the walls, and then went outside to inspect the exterior foundation. I trailed behind him like a nervous child, my dream crumbling before my eyes. He spent a long time examining the concrete slab, walking the perimeter of the house, his gaze fixed on the point where the structure met the earth. When he finally came back to me, the look on his face confirmed my worst fears. "Rachel, this isn't settlement," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "These are stress fractures. Something is wrong with the foundation. The slab isn't stable, it's moving." The words hit me like a physical blow. The foundation, the one part of the house that had to be perfect, the part that supported everything else. "What do you mean, it's moving?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The soil reports were good. The pour was supervised. Everything was done to code. "I know," he said, his eyes full of sympathy. "But the evidence is right here. These cracks are indicative of a foundational failure. We need to do some more investigation, maybe get some core samples of the concrete, but my gut tells me the slab itself is compromised." A foundational failure wasn't just a problem, it was a catastrophe. It meant the house was fundamentally unsafe. At best, it would require a hugely expensive and invasive repair process that involved hydraulically lifting the entire structure. At worst, it meant the house would have to be condemned and torn down. My savings, my loans, my entire future were tied up in this building. That evening, I called my father. Part of me, a small, naive part, hoped he would be horrified, that he would rush to my side and use his decades of experience to help me fix it. I told him about the cracks, about what Leo had said. His reaction was chillingly calm. "Well, that's what happens," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "You hire a cheap crew, you cut corners. I warned you this would happen if you tried to do it without me. You were too proud to listen." "The crew wasn't cheap, and we didn't cut any corners," I shot back, my voice rising with anger and panic. "Everything was done by the book. This shouldn't be happening." "The world isn't a textbook, Rachel," he said smugly. "Experience matters. You thought your fancy degree made you smarter than me. Now look at you. You've built yourself a house of cards." He hung up. I stood in my silent apartment, the phone still pressed to my ear, and a cold, sickening realization began to dawn on me, his lack of surprise, his smug, "I told you so" tone. It wasn't the reaction of a concerned father. It was the reaction of someone who had been expecting this to happen. The thought was so monstrous, so unthinkable that I immediately tried to push it away. He was angry, he was resentful, but he wouldn't do this. He couldn't. He was my father. But the seed of suspicion had been planted. I remembered his threat. "You'll find out you can't build anything without me." Was this what he meant? Was he so determined to prove me wrong that he would orchestrate my failure? The next few days were a blur of frantic phone calls and sleepless nights. The construction company was in damage control mode, insisting they had followed the plans to the letter. They brought in their own engineer, who confirmed Leo's assessment. The foundation was failing. The blame game started immediately. The construction firm blamed the concrete supplier. The concrete supplier blamed the soil engineer. Nobody had any answers, but everyone was pointing fingers. My dream home was now a potential lawsuit, a financial black hole that was threatening to swallow me whole. I felt completely broken. I would visit the site and just stare at the cracks, which seemed to grow larger every day. They were a visible representation of my shattered dreams and the fracturing of my relationship with my father. I sat on the floor of what was supposed to be my beautiful new living room and cried. I had poured everything into this house, and it was falling apart. I felt a despair so profound, I thought it might crush me. But then, as I sat there, surrounded by the evidence of my ruin, a tiny, practical thought cut through the fog of my grief. The security cameras. I had installed them a month ago after some tools went missing from the site. They were motion-activated and recorded everything to a cloud server. I hadn't even thought to check them. With a surge of desperate hope, I pulled out my phone. The security system was a simple, 4-camera setup I'd bought online. I'd placed one watching the driveway, one on the back patio, one inside the main living area, and a final one covering the side of the house where the main utility connections were. I'd installed them mostly as a deterrent, a way to keep an eye on the property after the workers left for the day. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened the app on my phone, my fingers fumbling with the password. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly. Maybe Evie. Dents of vandalism. Maybe a clue that the construction crew had done something wrong when I wasn't there. My mind was still refusing to seriously consider the darkest possibility. The app opened to a timeline of motion-activated recordings. I scrolled back, past clips of deer wandering across the property at dawn and raccoons investigating the trash bins at night. I went back weeks, to the period right after the foundation had been poured and had cured, but before the framing had gone up. This was the critical window. If something had been done to compromise the concrete, it would have happened then, when the slab was exposed and vulnerable. I spent hours poring over the footage, my eyes burning from the screen's glare. It was mostly tedious, wind blowing tarps around, cars passing on the distant road. But then I found it. A recording from a Tuesday night, almost 2 months ago. The timestamp was 11:47 p.m. The driveway camera clicked on, its infrared lens illuminating the scene in a ghostly black and white. A familiar-looking pickup truck, the same make and model as my father's, rolled slowly up the drive and stopped just out of the main frame, its headlights off. My breath caught in my throat. It had to be him. I switched to the camera covering the main living area, which at that time was just the vast, open concrete slab. A minute after the truck arrived, a figure walked into view. The person was wearing a dark hoodie, the hood pulled up to obscure their face, but their build, their gait, the way they carried themselves, it was unmistakably my father. He was carrying a heavy canvas bag and what looked like a long, steel drill bit. I felt a wave of nausea. I watched, my phone shaking in my hands as he walked to the center of the slab. He knelt, pulled a large, industrial-grade drill from the bag, and began to drill a series of holes deep into the newly cured concrete. He worked methodically, with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times. He drilled a hole, then moved a few feet and drilled another. He was strategic, targeting key structural points that I, as an architect, knew were critical for distributing the load of the house. After drilling about a dozen holes, he took out several small containers from his bag. He carefully poured a liquid from the containers into each of the holes he'd just drilled. I couldn't tell what it was from the grainy footage, but my mind raced through the possibilities. Some kind of chemical agent, an expansive compound designed to create microfractures under pressure. Then he pulled out the sledgehammer. My stomach dropped. The sound was off on the recording, but I could see the brutal, jarring impact as he swung the heavy hammer against the surface of the slab, right over the areas he had just drilled and filled. He wasn't trying to make obvious craters. He was creating shockwaves, sending deep internal fractures through the concrete, weakening it from the inside out. He was an artist of destruction, using his intimate knowledge of construction to inflict the most damaging, yet least visible, wounds. He was ensuring that the foundation wouldn't fail immediately. It would hold just long enough for the house to be built on top of it. Then, under the immense weight of the structure, his carefully created weak points would slowly give way, leading to the exact kind of stress fractures that were now destroying my home. He worked for nearly an hour under the cover of darkness, a phantom of pure malice on his own daughter's property. When he was finished, he used a bag of concrete dust to carefully sweep over the holes, camouflaging his work. He packed his tools, gave the slab one last look, and walked back to his truck. The final shot was from the driveway camera as his truck pulled away, disappearing into the night. I stared at the screen, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't just shock or anger I felt, it was a profound, soul-crushing grief. The man on that screen wasn't just a saboteur, he was my father. The same man who had taught me how to swing a hammer, who had praised my first clumsy drawings, who had held my hand at my mother's funeral. He had taken all that shared history, all that love and trust, and used it to meticulously engineer my ruin. His motivation was terrifyingly clear. It wasn't just about the business partnership. It was about power. He needed to prove that I was nothing without him. If I wouldn't let him build me up, he would tear me down. He would rather see my dream reduced to rubble than see me succeed on my own terms. I saved the footage to my laptop, making multiple copies and uploading one to a secure cloud server. The evidence was undeniable, a silent, monochrome testament to his betrayal. The initial shock began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The grief was still there, a heavy weight in my chest, but it was now mingled with a burgeoning rage. He thought he had broken me. He thought he had left me in a pile of debt and despair, with a house that was literally cracking under the pressure. He thought he was untouchable, that no one would ever suspect the town's most respected contractor of such a monstrous act. He was wrong. He had left a trail and I had found it. The game had changed. This was no longer just about a failing foundation. It was about justice. My father had used the tools of his trade to try and destroy me. Now I would use the tools of mine, precision, planning, and an unbreakable blueprint to expose him and watch as the walls of his own life came crashing down. The fight was far from over, but for the first time since I saw that first crack, I had a solid place to stand. I had the truth. The video footage was a nuclear bomb, and I knew I couldn't just detonate it randomly. I had to be strategic. My father was a pillar of the community, a man with deep connections and a sterling reputation built over 40 years. If I went public without a perfectly constructed case, he would paint me as a hysterical, incompetent daughter looking for someone to blame for her own failures. He would use his influence to crush me. I needed more than just a video. I needed an airtight case. I needed a team. The first person I called was Leo. I asked him to meet me at a coffee shop far from our usual neighborhood haunts. I didn't tell him what I'd found over the phone. When he arrived, I saw the deep concern etched on his face. He probably thought I was going to tell him I was giving up on the house. I opened my laptop and played the video without a word. He leaned in, his eyes fixed on the screen. I watched his expression shift from confusion to disbelief, and then to pure, unadulterated anger. When the video ended, he slowly leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. "That's monstrous," he whispered, shaking his head. "Rachel, I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Be my expert witness." Leo's expertise was the first pillar of my case. He could analyze the footage and explain, in technical, irrefutable terms, exactly what my father was doing to the concrete. He agreed immediately, his loyalty unwavering. He suggested we get a sample of the substance my father poured into the holes. If we could identify it, our case would be even stronger. He recommended a specialized forensics lab that could analyze core samples from the foundation. "It's likely an expansive grout or a chemical agent like calcium sulfoaluminate," Leo explained, his engineer brain already clicking into gear. "Something that would cause the concrete to degrade and expand from the inside out when put under pressure. It's diabolically clever. The damage would be delayed, making it almost impossible to trace back to the cause without knowing exactly what to look for." The next call was the hardest. I needed a lawyer, and not just any lawyer. I needed someone who specialized in construction law and wasn't afraid to go up against a local titan like my father. Maria, my best friend, had a connection. Her firm had worked with a lawyer named Jessica Thorne, a woman known for her sharp mind and take-no-prisoners attitude in the courtroom. I met Jessica at her downtown office. She was in her late 40s, impeccably dressed, with an aura of calm, unshakable confidence. I told her the entire story, from the business proposal to the threats, the sabotage, and finally, the video. I braced myself for skepticism, but Jessica just listened, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she simply nodded. "I believe you," she said, her voice firm. "In my line of work, I've learned that family disputes, especially those involving business and inheritance, can bring out the absolute worst in people." She reviewed my father's business history, his public filings, and his list of subcontractors. "Arthur is well connected," she noted. "Charming on the outside, but his business dealings have always had whispers of sharp practice. Nothing ever proven, but the whispers are there. This, however, is on another level." "This is criminal." Jessica laid out the plan. First, we needed to gather more evidence quietly. We couldn't let my father know we were onto him. We would proceed under the guise of a standard engineering investigation into the faulty foundation, a dispute between me, the builder, and the concrete supplier. This would give Leo the cover he needed to get on site and take the core samples without raising suspicion. Second, Jessica began digging into my father's finances. His motive, she argued, wasn't just ego, it was likely financial desperation. A man with a healthy business doesn't risk everything on a sociopathic act of revenge. She hired a forensic accountant to discreetly look into his company's books. While Leo and Jessica worked their angles, I had my own role to play. I had to act broken. I had to let my father believe his plan had worked. I called him, forcing sobs into my voice. I told him engineers had confirmed the house was a total loss and that the insurance wouldn't cover it because it was deemed a construction defect. I told him I was ruined, that I would have to sell the land for a fraction of its value and declare bankruptcy. "I should have listened to you," I choked out, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "You were right all along." His response was sickeningly sweet. "Oh, honey, don't you worry," he cooed, the fake sympathy dripping from every word. "It's a tough lesson to learn, but you'll get through it. Your old dad is here for you. We'll figure something out." He even offered to buy the land from me at a discount to help you recoup some of your losses. He was a vulture circling what he thought was a carcass. The results from the forensic teams started to roll in, and each report was another nail in my father's coffin. Leo's core samples confirmed our suspicions. The lab found concentrated levels of a powerful, expansive chemical agent in the exact spots where the video showed my father drilling. The chemical was designed to react with the lye in the concrete, creating microfissures that would spiderweb under sustained pressure. The engineer's report stated, in no uncertain terms, that the foundation had been intentionally and maliciously compromised by a chemical accelerant. Then the forensic accountant delivered the bombshell. My father's company was on the verge of collapse. He had made a series of bad investments, underbid on several large projects, and was drowning in debt. The respected Arthur and Daughter Construction was a hollow shell. His desperate attempt to force a partnership with me wasn't about legacy, it was a financial lifeline. He needed my success, my modern brand, and my capital to save himself. When I refused, he didn't just want to teach me a lesson. He wanted to eliminate the competition and potentially swoop in to buy my prime piece of land on the cheap, once I was financially ruined. With all the pieces in place, the video, the expert witness testimony, the chemical analysis, and the clear financial motive, Jessica said we were ready. We had two paths, a civil lawsuit to recover damages and a criminal complaint for destruction of property and fraud. Jessica advised we pursue both, starting with the civil case to freeze his assets. But I knew a lawsuit wasn't enough. My father had built his entire identity on the foundation of being a strong, respectable family man and an honest businessman. I wasn't just going to take his money, I was going to demolish that foundation in front of the whole world. The final confrontation couldn't happen in a sterile courtroom. It had to be on my terms. With our case fully assembled, Jessica advised a direct, pre-litigation confrontation. The goal was to present my father with our irrefutable evidence in a controlled environment, forcing him to the negotiating table before a messy public battle. It was a sound legal strategy, but it didn't feel like enough. Justice, for me, required more than a settlement check. It required him to face what he had done, not just to me, but to our family's memory and his own legacy. So I devised a different kind of confrontation. I decided to call a family meeting. It would be held at the damaged house. I told my aunts, uncles, and cousins that I needed their emotional support. I explained that I was facing financial ruin due to a catastrophic construction failure and that I wanted the family to see the damage firsthand before I had to give up the property. My father, of course, was the guest of honor. He couldn't refuse to attend without looking like a callous parent. He probably saw it as his ultimate victory lap, a chance to posture as the wise patriarch consoling his foolish, failed daughter in front of the entire family. The day of the meeting was gray and overcast, the sky threatening rain, which felt fitting. I arrived early with Leo and Maria. Maria helped me set up a large television screen in the middle of the living room, the cracks in the walls serving as a grim backdrop. Leo had prepared a short, simple presentation that explained the technical nature of the foundation's failure in layman's terms. Jessica was on standby, ready to step in when the time was right. My relatives began to arrive, their faces a mixture of pity and curiosity. They walked through the house, murmuring about what a shame it was, how beautiful it could have been. I played the part of the heartbroken victim perfectly, my voice quiet and my eyes downcast. Then my father, Arthur, arrived. He walked in with an air of performative gravitas, his expression a carefully crafted mask of fatherly concern. He put his arm around me, squeezing my shoulder. "It's a terrible thing, Rachel," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "But we're family. We'll get you through this." I had to use every ounce of self-control not to recoil from his touch. I let him play his part. He walked the family through the house, pointing at the cracks and offering his expert opinion. "You see, this is what happens with these new, fast-curing concrete mixes," he'd say with a knowing shake of his head. "They don't have the integrity of the old ways, a classic case of cutting corners." Once everyone was gathered in the living room, I stood before them, took a deep breath, and began. "Thank you all for coming," I started, my voice trembling slightly, though this time it was with adrenaline, not sadness. "As you know, I've lost everything I've worked for in this house. For weeks, we've been trying to figure out what went wrong. We thought it was the contractor or the concrete supplier, but we were wrong." I paused, letting the silence hang in the air. I looked directly at my father, whose benevolent smile was starting to look a little strained. "The failure wasn't an accident," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "The foundation wasn't faulty, it was sabotaged." A wave of shocked murmurs went through the room. My father scoffed loudly. "Rachel, that's a ridiculous accusation. Who would do something like that?" "I'm glad you asked," I said, picking up the remote for the television. "Because we have the answer." I pressed play. The screen flickered to life, showing the grainy, black-and-white footage from the security camera. The room fell silent. They watched as the familiar pickup truck pulled up. They watched as the hooded figure got out. They watched as my father, their brother, their uncle, their patriarch, systematically and coldly drilled into the foundation of his own daughter's home. The collective gasp in the room was sharp and sudden. Every eye darted from the screen to my father, who had gone pale. His mask of concern had shattered, replaced by a look of pure, cornered panic. The video continued, showing him pouring the chemicals, swinging the sledgehammer, and meticulously covering his tracks. There was no sound, but the violence of his actions echoed in the dead silence of the room. When the video ended, I turned off the screen. The silence was deafening. No one knew what to say. They just stared at Arthur, their expressions a horrified mix of disbelief and dawning comprehension. My aunt, his sister, was the first to speak. "Arthur, is that you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. My father opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked around the room, at the faces of his family, and saw not support, but judgment. "We have more evidence," I said, my voice as cold and hard as concrete. "We have core samples from the foundation that show the presence of a chemical accelerant. We have a forensic analysis of your company's finances that shows you're on the brink of bankruptcy. We know you tried to force me into a partnership to save your failing business. And when I said no, you did this." I gestured to the cracked walls around us. You tried to ruin me to prove a point, to prove I couldn't succeed without you, but you were wrong. Then, as if on cue, Jessica Thorne walked through the front door, her briefcase in hand. She didn't say a word, just stood beside me, her presence a clear and unmistakable statement. The trap was sprung. My father looked like he was going to be sick. The color had drained from his face, and he was visibly trembling. He looked from me to Jessica, to the horrified faces of his family. The foundation of his life, his reputation, his family's respect, his carefully constructed image, had just been demolished in the space of 5 minutes. He had walked in as the respected patriarch, ready to preside over his daughter's failure. Now he was just a desperate old man, exposed as a criminal in front of everyone he cared about. The battle was over. All that was left was to witness the collapse. The aftermath of the video screening was catastrophic for my father. The room, once filled with sympathetic murmurs for me, was now thick with a stunned, accusatory silence directed at him. His siblings, my aunts and uncles, looked at him as if he were a stranger. They had spent their lives looking up to him, their successful older brother who had built a name for himself. Now, they saw a man who would destroy his own child's future out of spite and greed. "Arthur, how could you?" His sister finally choked out, tears welling in her eyes. "She's your daughter." My father finally found his voice, but it was weak and raspy. "It's not what it looks like," he stammered, looking wildly around the room for an ally, for anyone who would take his side. "She's twisting things. She drove me to it with her arrogance and disrespect." But his excuses fell flat. The evidence was too absolute, the betrayal too profound. No one was buying his pathetic attempt to play the victim. Jessica stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Arthur," she said calmly, "my client is prepared to offer you a one-time deal, right here, right now. You will sign over why? Our business, its assets, and the deed to your own home to Rachel to cover the damages for the demolition and rebuilding of this house. You will also sign a legally binding confession of your actions. In exchange, we will not immediately release the video and our findings to the district attorney. You have 10 minutes to decide." It was a brilliant move. She wasn't just asking for financial restitution. She was demanding the complete dismantling of his life's work, the very thing he had tried to protect by destroying mine. His business, his home, everything would become mine. He stared at her, then at me, his eyes filled with a venomous hatred. "You'd do that to your own father?" he spat. "You stopped being my father the night you picked up that sledgehammer," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "You are just a man who committed a crime against me. This isn't about family anymore. This is about consequences." The next 10 minutes were the longest of my life. My father paced the room like a caged animal, while the family watched in silence. He was trapped. If he refused, Jessica would pick up the phone, and he would be facing felony charges, public humiliation, and almost certain jail time. If he agreed, he would lose everything he had ever built. He had constructed his own prison, and now he was being asked to hand over the key. In the end, his cowardice won out. The fear of a public trial and prison was greater than his pride. With a shaking hand, he took the pen Jessica offered and signed the documents she had prepared. He signed away his company. He signed away his house. And he signed a detailed confession, admitting to the premeditated sabotage of my home. As soon as the last document was signed, he stormed out of the house without another word, not looking at anyone. He got in his truck and sped away, leaving behind the wreckage of his reputation. The family slowly dispersed, each person coming to me to offer a quiet, stunned apology and a hug. They were grappling with the revelation that the man they thought they knew was a monster. The family was fractured, perhaps irreparably, but my relationship with them was, for the first time, based on a truth they could no longer ignore. In the weeks that followed, the terms of the settlement were executed. I became the owner of Arthur's construction, its equipment, its client list, and its debts, which, as the forensic accountant had revealed, were substantial. I also took ownership of the house I grew up in. The irony was not lost on me. He had tried to leave me homeless, and in the end, I owned both of our homes. My first act as the new owner of his company was to rebrand it. I dissolved his old business and started fresh under my own name, Rachel Design and Build. I brought in a new management team and instituted a culture of transparency and quality, the very things he had pretended to champion but had long since abandoned. I used his own equipment and some of his former employees, the ones who were good people caught in his toxic orbit, to demolish what was left of my ruined house. Watching the excavators tear down the cracked walls was not sad, it was cathartic. It was the physical removal of his betrayal. With every load of rubble that was hauled away, I felt lighter. Leo stood by my side, his hand on my shoulder as we watched the last wall fall. "A clean slate," he said softly. "More than that," I replied, "a new foundation." My father became a ghost in our town. The story, despite our attempts to keep it contained, inevitably leaked out. Whispers followed him everywhere. Old clients questioned his past work. Business partners cut ties. He sold the truck he'd driven to my property and was seen taking the bus. He moved into a small rental apartment on the other side of the county. He was a man who had lost everything because he couldn't stand to see his daughter gain anything on her own. The prison he now lived in was one of his own making, a solitary confinement of shame and irrelevance. I never saw him again, and I never felt the need to. He was a part of the rubble that I had cleared away. My life was now about building, not looking back at the demolition. The year that followed was one of intense, exhausting, but deeply rewarding work. Demolishing the compromised structure was the easy part. Rebuilding was a testament to resilience. I redesigned the house from the ground up, making subtle improvements, strengthening the plans, and infusing the new blueprints with the lessons I had learned. This new house wasn't just a structure of wood and glass. It was a fortress of my own making, built on a foundation of integrity that no one could ever shatter. Leo was my rock through the entire process. Our friendship, forged in the crisis, had blossomed into something deeper. He was there not just as an engineer, but as a partner. He reviewed every detail of the new foundation, ensuring it was overspecified and perfect. He was there on the D. I of the concrete pour, watching over the process like a hawk. And he was there to hold my hand as we watched the new walls go up, straight and true this time. His quiet strength and unwavering belief in me were as critical to the project as any steel beam. Maria was my other pillar of support. She helped me with the creative side of rebranding my new company, Rachel Design and Build. She designed a logo that was clean, modern, and strong, everything my father's business was not. She helped me choose interior finishes for the new house, turning what could have been a painful reminder of the past into a joyful act of creation. My friendship with her was a beautiful reminder that the family you choose is often stronger than the one you are born into. Taking over my father's business was a challenge. I spent the first few months untangling the financial mess he had left behind, paying off debts, and reassuring clients. I was determined to transform his tarnished company into one synonymous with honesty and quality. I hired a young, ambitious team that shared my vision. We took on smaller projects at first, proving ourselves with every job. Our reputation grew organically, built on good work and happy clients, not on bluster, and a name built on lies. Within a year, my company was profitable. I had not only survived my father's attempt to ruin me, but I had built a thriving business from its ashes. I sold the house I grew up in. There were too many ghosts in those hallways. I used the proceeds to pay off the last of the business debts and invest in new technology for my firm. It felt like a final severing of the past, a way of converting his legacy into fuel for my future. Finally, the day came when my new home was finished. It looked nearly identical to the first one from the outside, but it felt entirely different. It felt safe. It felt earned. It felt like home. Leo, Maria, and my new chosen family of friends and loyal colleagues gathered in the living room for a housewarming party. We stood in the exact spot where, a year earlier, I had exposed my father's treachery. But now, instead of a television screen showing a grainy video of betrayal, there was a beautiful fireplace, its warm glow filling the room. The cracks in the walls were gone, replaced by smooth, perfect surfaces adorned with Maria's vibrant art. Leo raised a glass of champagne. "To Rachel," he said, his voice full of warmth and pride, who, when faced with a broken foundation, had the strength to tear it all down and build something even better. Everyone cheered, and as I looked around at their smiling faces, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't thought possible. The anger and grief I had carried for so long had finally been replaced by gratitude and joy. My father had meant for this piece of land to be my downfall, a monument to my failure, but I had transformed it into a symbol of my strength. My journey taught me a harsh but valuable lesson, that the foundations of our lives are not just made of concrete and steel, but of trust, love, and self-respect. And when those foundations are betrayed, we have a choice. We can let ourselves crumble along with them, or we can find the courage to clear the rubble, design a better blueprint, and build again, stronger than before. My name is Rachel, I am an architect, and I built my life on solid ground.